Variation and selection and A-level biology. So variation is the differences that exist between individuals. Variation within a species, which is known as intraspecific variation, means individuals in a population can show a wide spread of different phenotypes. Variation can be caused by genetic and or environmental factors. Although individuals of the same species have the same genes, they have lots of different alleles. This causes genetic variation within a species. The main source of genetic variation is mutation. So when changes in the base sequences lead to production of new alleles. But genetic variation is also introduced in meiosis through crossing over of chromatids and independent segregation of chromosomes, and also because of random fertilization of gametes. Variation within a species can also be caused by differences in the environment, like food, climate, or lifestyle. And most variation within a species is caused by a mixture of genetic and environmental factors, but only genetic variation results in evolution. So evolution is the frequency of an allele in a population, and it changes over time. Evolution can happen by genetic drift or by natural selection. So natural selection. Organisms face many pressures that affect their chances of living, such as predation, disease, and competition. These are selection pressures. Selection pressures create a fight for survival. Because members of the same species have different alleles, there is variation between them, meaning that some are better adapted to the selection pressures than others. This means there are differential levels of survival and reproductive success in a population. Those with a phenotype that increases their chance of survival are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes, including the beneficial allele that determines their phenotype. And they're more likely to survive than those with individuals with a different phenotype, meaning a greater proportion of the next generation inherit the beneficial alleles. They are also more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes. So the frequency of the beneficial alleles increases from generation to generation. Okay, types of natural selection. There are 3 types of natural selection, and the effects of natural selection on one allele frequency hinges on the selection pressures imposed on the population. So depending on what the selection pressure is, depending on what type of natural selection will occur. So there's 3 types of natural selection. There's directional selection, stabilising selection, and disruptive selection. So first of all, we're going to look at stabilising selection. So this is where those with the alleles for characteristics towards the middle of the range, those with average characteristics, are more likely to survive and reproduce. And it occurs when the environment isn't changing, and it reduces the range of possible phenotypes. So one example of this is in a mammal population, there's a range of fur lengths, and having fur at the extremes of this range actually reduces the chance of surviving because it's harder to maintain body temperature. So mammals with very short fur have a selective disadvantage. But mammals with those for normal fur lengths are the most likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their alleles. And these mammals have a selective advantage, so the alleles for average fur length increases. So you can see that the peak gets narrower, gets higher, and the curve gets narrower. So over the time, the proportion of the population with average fur length increases, and the range of fur length actually decreases, which results in a narrower graph. and the proportion with average fur length have increased, resulting in a taller curve at the average fur length. Another example is human birth weight. This is an example of stabilising selection. So stabilising selection in humans is where the birth weight has this normal distribution curve, this bell-shaped curve. But mortality for newborns is greater for those that are underweight or overweight. So it could be the underweight ones might have been born early and therefore they have a lower chance of survival. Or the overweight ones, it could be that the mother could have complications during the birth process because of the fact that the weight is high. So actually, the minimum mortality is about 7 pounds. So the average birth weight is selected for because 7 pounds is the weight where there's least likely to be a mortality. So the middle range birth weight is selected for. So next one is directional selection. So this is where individuals with alleles for a single extreme phenotype are more likely to survive and reproduce. This could be in response to an environmental change. So as an example of this, cheetahs are the fastest animals on land, and this characteristic was probably established through directional selection, since those that have alleles for increased speed are more likely to catch their prey than the slower ones, meaning they're more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their alleles. Over time, the frequency of alleles for high speed increases and the population becomes faster. In the offspring graph, the average speed has moved towards the extreme. So they've got faster. And then finally, you've got disruptive selection. And this is where individuals with alleles for the extreme phenotypes are more likely to survive and reproduce. So it's the opposite to stabilising selection because the characteristics towards the middle of the range are actually reduced. And it occurs when the environment favours more than one phenotype. So as an example of this, in bird population there's a range of beak sizes. Birds with large beaks are adapted to eat big seeds, and birds with small beaks are specialised to eat little seeds. So in an environment when the majority of seeds are either large or small, and few are a medium size, the birds with medium-sized beaks will have a disadvantage, a survival disadvantage, because they're unable to eat either large or small beaks effectively. They're unable to eat either large or small seeds effectively. Birds with large or small beaks are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their alleles. So eventually the alleles for a large beak and a small beak increase in frequency, but the alleles for medium-sized beak decreases in frequency, and the proportion of the population that has small, very small, or very large beaks increases. Okay, so that is variation and selection.